Welcome to our session on individualized development plans. I appreciate y'all being here today to have this workshop. I apologize that we had to move entirely online today on a bit of short notice. We try to do these sessions as much as possible hybrid with an in-person and a virtual format. Unfortunately today, my youngest is a bit under the weather, and so I was unable to come into the office, and so I'm presenting virtually only today. But I appreciate folks that have made the jump and are attending virtually with us today. My name is Jesse Singleton. I am the Assistant Director for Student Support with UTEP's Graduate School. Excited to talk with you all and share about individualized development plans today. As we get started, please let us know if you have any questions or technical issues in the chat, and we'll be happy to assist with that. I have a co-host helping me out today who will help out in the chat area and give us some support, and that is my grad assistant, Edgar Monroy, who will be helping us out as I go through. Let's get right into the IDP and talk a bit about that today. So the first thing I want to chat with you all about and elaborate on is why the graduate school recommends individualized development plans and why we have these sessions and why it's a focus point for us. And it really kind of lets you know some of the background research that has gone into this recommendation as a best practice. And so there's several points in general that helps us know they're beneficial. The first one is that they have been shown to increase productivity for graduate students, and really when the goal setting is centralized to the experience. And so that's a huge portion of it is, the goal setting piece. They've been shown to reduce stress for graduate students who use them. It's the expectation setting, and so it allows to reduce uncertainty and ambiguity, and that helps reduce stress levels. It also allows for troubleshooting and early intervention. And so as you're working through your programs, it's better to find out if you're a little off your milestones or you need to make an adjustment to a thesis or a chapter earlier rather than when you're really far along. And so the IDP, being a living kind of revisited document, allows for that early troubleshooting and allows you to maintain good progress and not waste time. And then the last piece of saving time is also hugely important. And so through increasing your productivity, reducing your stress and helping you be more efficient, and the troubleshooting interventions, all of that contributes to saving your time, which we know is very valuable as graduate students. You have a lot on your plate, a lot that you have to do. And so anything we do that helps save time and make you more efficient is overall a good positive step. And so research by many folks have kind of contributed to this as a best practice for graduate education, and we at the graduate school at UTEP also adopt those things. But you may be asking, if you signed up for this, what exactly is an IDP or an individualized development plan? You may have heard about it or heard it referenced, but you're not quite sure what that is. You may have not worked on one yet, and that's okay. We're going to go through it a bit today. And then I also, for folks that already are familiar, it's okay as well to get a refresher and kind of focus back in on what is the essence of these documents. If you would like to see a copy of our recent IDP, and again, the advantage of being online, you can feel free to pull this up and be reviewing it as we're going through the session. If you log into go to the graduate school website, there is a link for downloading the most recent version of the IDP template on the forms page and also the internal funding page. I usually direct people to the internal funding page because I have a link button right there front and center. But if you log in there and click that button, it will download the Word document so you can review it as we go along. Feel free to do that. But as you'll see, in looking at it, it has a few just major sections that you complete. The first is a career and long-term goals section. Idea being, we want you to be thinking about how is your graduate education and what you're doing right now contributing to any long-term goals, the career aspirations that you have, whether that's faculty, working in the professional field, working for government positions, whatever that is. We want you to try and center that and look at those long-term goals and then see how all of your short-term goals build up to that. There's a comment section, which is really your space to discuss the challenges and successes you've had since the last time you had a review meeting. If it's the first time you're going through and doing an IDP and you haven't had a review meeting, it's a space to talk about what you've already went through and worked on, maybe even outside of the academic realm, and then that's a good space for dialogue with your mentor. So it kind of helps set the stage for that. There is the short-term goals grid. There are actually 2 of those. It's probably where the meat of the IDP lives. There's one for discussing your prior review goals. So anything you were supposed to work on since the last time you met with your mentor to discuss your individualized development plan. If it's your first time, again, you leave that section blank or rate an A because you haven't done that yet. And then there's a second grid that has your upcoming short-term goals. And so that's where you're going to be writing out and kind of discussing what are you hoping to accomplish over the next month, semester, academic year. When we think of short-term goals, we're kind of thinking in those kind of 3 time frames because an IDP is typically revisited at minimum once an academic year. We include a mentor and committee comment section. And so there's a space with each goal in the grid where they can comment on progress, but there's also an overall section where they can talk a bit about how you're doing. And those sections are key to really helping you understand your progress and move forward because the feedback loop is very important in an IDP. And then we also encourage you to update your CV or your resume, whichever you prefer using, and include that with your IDP. And so that also gets you in the habit of regularly updating that document so that it is accurate and has everything that you need. So I have a couple questions as we go through. Alex has asked, what is a review meeting? Who is involved in that meeting? And so a review meeting is actually when you sit down with your mentor and go through your goals and seek feedback. And we'll talk a bit about how you can navigate that through our session today. Typically, it's you and your mentor. You also may pass your IDP to your committee for your thesis committee, and they may review it. You may or may not have a meeting with all of them. There may be a lot of folks to sit down and have a meeting with, or you may meet with them one-on-one. But that's generally who you're including in your review meeting. I will also say that every program, it can be a bit different in how they approach the IDP, and they may have their own template. And so while we have a kind of standard recommended template at the graduate school, it is not the obligatory template. And so if your program or your mentor has a different preferred version, you can definitely use that. And if there's a different way they go about the review, that's also entirely appropriate. The important thing is just that you are going through and working on talking about your goals and seeking feedback. So we know a little bit now about what an IDP is in general. And again, if you want to see a copy of what that looks like, I encourage you to just jump right on the graduate school website while you're listening today. Download that copy and you can have it kind of on the other half of your screen and kind of go through it as we're talking about it today. And if you've already written an IDP, I encourage you to open that document and have it open as we're talking about our session today. There have been some updates to the document that we implemented at the start of this year. And kind of went live in early to mid-fall. And so if you have a document you've been working with for several years, there is a new format and template. It's not drastically different. We removed some of the instructional piece at the very beginning. There's about a page of directions at the front that weren't as relevant or necessary, and there's a little bit too much explanation for what the document needed. So we removed that, made it a little more simple, consolidated some feedback sections. But yeah, feel free to look at that. So once you start writing the individualized development plan, there are a couple things that you need to keep in mind, and this should be something that you sit down and work on in advance of going to meet with your mentor to talk about it. First is you want to be intentional and reflective. When we give you that space in the comment section, it's a space to really discuss how you're doing and to be a bit vulnerable up to the level that you're comfortable with and reflect on your experience. You definitely see IDPs where folks share a bit about the personal challenges they've experienced and how it's impacted their academic experience. And that's definitely appropriate as long as it's managed appropriately. And so you want to reflect on that and kind of see yourself as a holistic person in that document. Really work through and reflect on the goals that you've worked on. Did you achieve them the way you wanted to? And if not, kind of think about why that is. You want to be honest with yourself and honest with your mentor in that process so that it can be effective. We need you to utilize SMART goals in the goal setting section, and we'll talk a bit about how to use those if you haven't had anyone talk to you about SMART goals in the past. Otherwise, you'll get a refresher. And so you want to use that so the goals can actually be actionable and can be achieved. You're going to need to seek really constructive feedback. And again, we'll spend a good chunk of our session talking about how you can seek that feedback and be prepared to receive it so that you get good feedback and you can actually use it. And then you should revisit and update that plan regularly. We generally advise at least once an academic year, although realistically meeting regularly or having it available consistently when you meet with your mentor, if that's maybe once a month or every other week, depending on your relationship with them, maybe it's every other month. However you're checking in, having the IDP available so you can go through your goals, it can be really, really helpful. Again, you want your feedback on goals to be timely. And so if you set a goal to complete by November, but your next review is until April and you don't get feedback until April on a goal from November, you can see how that's not very timely and it may not be as helpful to you. So, meeting with and discussing the goals as you work through completing them, or you need to revise them because you weren't able to complete it, can really get the most out of the document. And so again, it's a living document. It's not static. It's not something you complete and then it just kind of goes into your drive. You should use it regularly for it to be effective. What I'll also include here in the not only the how it can help you piece is that when you use all of these steps to write a high quality individualized development plan, that also is very helpful when you apply for funding with the graduate school through like our travel grant or our Dotson research grant, because both of those are scored elements of the application. And so if you have a very cursory individualized development plan that you've worked on very quickly, your mentor hasn't really looked at, you write your goal as finished thesis and they write good job, gold star, and you turn that in, you'll meet the requirement that you have to have an IDP included, but you're going to get a much lower score on that portion of the rubric. And that may be the difference between receiving the funding and not. And so make sure you consider that. The other piece where we use the IDPs at the graduate school level is if your program or your mentor or anyone is looking for an exception and request that formally from the dean, we do review the IDP and it needs to be a high quality document. And so as an example, if you are entering your 8th or 9th year in your program, you need an extension on the time limits for time to degree. The Dean Kreitz is going to request an IDP that shows where you're at, what progress you've made, and when you plan to finish. And if the document isn't very well done and doesn't show the thought and intention, he's not going to approve the request. So there are some tangible benefits from the graduate school level of spending time with this beyond the personal benefits you receive by completing it in a high quality way. And again, feel free to keep posting any questions there in the chat if you have any. So getting into the goals piece, again, there's two major components here. There's the goals and there's the feedback. So when you get into your goals, those can vary by long-term and short-term. When we think of long-term, those are career and job-related goals. It's a few years into the future. Or if you're nearing the end of your program, it may only be a few months from now, but it's your long-term goal you've been working on for a while. And so you're looking beyond the immediate academic piece and looking at what comes after when you think of the long-term piece. Really figuring out what career you're looking to go into, what area that is. And you can have a couple different versions of this. It doesn't have to be, I'm going to work for IBM in this capacity within this amount of time. You can put in there that I'm interested in potentially working at IBM or potentially working for a research academic research organization with an institution, or I'm in federal government, right? And then indicating kind of where in those branching paths you may want to go and what your interest is. But you want to set a target. And so that's where your long-term goal comes in. Your short-term goals, as I've mentioned, those are things you're setting from a year, semester, a monthly basis. And you want to be as specific as possible on these milestones to really give yourself a good roadmap that you're making progress. And so those are the more incremental goals as opposed to one big overarching goal. Usually you want to have several of these on the IDP, and there's several kind of boxes I'll show you in the example when we get to it in the slides. Within those goals, there are a couple types that you can have. And so you may have things that are performance goals. And so you want to finish a chapter on your dissertation, taking a professional exam, completing a teaching certificate, submitting a paper or a poster for a conference presentation, finishing something for publication, your performance goals that you want to achieve. The other type would be your learning goals. And so let's say you want to include something in there, not just about finishing your chapter or X number of chapters for your committee to review. You want to work on 3 specific aspects of your writing that are not your strongest, and then your path forward on that. Indicating you want to learn a language to assist you in your research or want to brush up on that. Potentially very important here within our bilingual, binational community. Or indicating there's a specific lab you want to set that you want to work on improving a skill, right? And so that's a skill development piece. It's important to include those as well and not just track out, yep, this is my academic milestones. We want you to see the academic experience as developmental and how it's helping you reach that career goal. And that goes beyond just the academic piece of getting X grade to move on to the next gate to finish your degree. How are you tangibly improving yourself so that you're ready for the workforce, you're ready for the academic environment, you're ready to be a professor and faculty member. So work on the learning piece as well. As I mentioned, we'll talk about SMART goals. And so when you actually write out your goals, and we'll take some practice of this today in an exercise, you want to work on making sure they're specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. That's the acronym SMART stands for, right? And so as you go through and you write out a goal, you then kind of sit back and evaluate, does it meet all these criteria? Because again, if you are able to make it specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound, you're much more likely to achieve that goal long-term. And so we encourage folks to really work within that SMART framework. And so the way this looks would be, if you're working on a SMART goal, you might write a goal that is avoid bees, not the letter grade, the insect, avoid bees. That might be your goal, but it's not really a SMART goal. It's not specific, it's not measurable, it's probably not achievable, it's not relevant, it's not time-bound. So what does this actually look like as we think of this really abstract goal? If I was writing it in a SMART format, I would write something saying, avoid being stung by more than 10 times during the October honey collection due to my allergies, right? That hits all the measurements of SMART with the caveat that maybe I shouldn't be collecting honey if I have allergies to bees. But it's much more likely that I can achieve that if I'm setting, why I want to achieve it, specific, there's a measurable component, hopefully achievable through some method of avoidance and equipment relevant to what I'm doing, and it's time bound, right? But if we take that and move that out of kind of this abstract, kind of goofy example, if you think about this in your academic world, and you might put a goal initially saying you want to get a meaningful position within your field after graduation, right? That's a goal that we see happen, kind of pop up all the time. Either students will articulate that in a session or they'll put it on their IDP. And that's a laudable goal, but it's not really specific. It's not measurable. It's hard to know if you've achieved it, because what does meaningful really mean? It's hard to know how relevant it is, and it's not really time-bound very well. So how can you make this a little bit more specific? How can you make this more likely to be achieved? It's kind of transitioning it to a full SMART goal. And so saying, accepting a job offer at a position that offers opportunities for professional advancement in an academic and professional setting within 2 months of completing my degree hits all the marks of being a SMART goal. And so when you have these types of specific sections of the goal, you can kind of work more clearly towards it and more likely to achieve it. Another example, for an academic goal, you might write, complete a partial dissertation draft for your mentor to review. Again, a very common goal that we might see, but not really fitting into the SMART section. And so if you're wanting to more likely achieve it, or if you're wanting to get a higher mark on your evaluation piece, if you're submitting for Dodson or travel or something like that, transition this to a SMART goal. The way you would do that would be writing something like complete draft of Chapter 2 and Chapter 3 of Dissertation for Mentor Review and Feedback by October 15th. It's specific on what you're trying to achieve. It gives you a measurable quantity. There's 2 chapters you want to complete. We know who we're giving it to. It's hopefully achievable based on the amount of work that you need. It's relevant to your academic experience, and it's time bound. You have a date and when you need to deliver it. And so all of those steps will make it easier for you to be able to achieve that goal. So if we look at an example of what this looks like on the actual document or the section of the document, this is actually screen captured directly from the short-term review period goals from an IDP that's on our website. And so you can see there is a section for them to write their goal and then a section for them to discuss how that went, right? And so the student is set kind of 3 separate goals and given progress on all of them. One goal is academic progress, so completing chapters by specific dates and when to send them for review. There's a learning goal that's specific about working on writing and how they'll go about doing that. And there's a goal for kind of professional development of submitting a paper for an article for submission as a paper. And so all of them fit the SMART category. And there's progress kind of statements from the student because this is kind of the review period. And so kind of tracks the progress and it's open and honest, right? And so chapter 4 was done on time. Chapter 5 was a bit late because there were some delays and that happens. It's important to reflect and acknowledge that. And then it talks about kind of submitting to the advisor. There's discussion of the learning development that's happened. And so met with them weekly and bi-weekly and that their plan moving forward, maybe only the bi-weekly meeting is necessary. Kind of shows the reflective piece of where they set their goal and then reevaluating what their time commitments were and what they needed. And then kind of noting the success of submitting their article. And so this is what the goal section looks like as you're writing an IDP. And again, if you're wanting it to be high quality, you're wanting it to be effective for you as the person who's reviewing it, and you're wanting to, again, maybe meet those high marks for the scored sections of our applications, this is what we're looking for. I'll pause here to check to see if there are any questions and give folks an opportunity if they have questions to go ahead and ask them. Any questions? All right, well, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, but here's where we will take a bit of an activity break to kind of work on some of these things. And when we come back, we'll transition to the section discussing feedback. We do this a bit differently because we are entirely virtual. And so I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set a timer for us. And there are 2 ways to do this. I'll show you both versions, whether you're new or whether you are a returning person. We will work on that. So if you are new, you've not written an IDP before, what you'll do is you'll take 2 minutes and you will write a long-term goal for your IDP. And then you want to add a semester performance goal that aligns with it, and then a learning goal that aligns with that. So kind of think about what is your career goal, what's your after action, and then what's a semester performance and learning goal that contributes to that. About 2 minutes for that section. And then we'll come back and we'll have just a group conversation and workshop that and see how good we did. And get some feedback for folks. So please be ready to share, whether it's in chat or going on mic, please be ready for that. And we'll just take 2 minutes for that. If you have worked on an IDP before and you have it, what I'll ask you to do is pick one of your current goals from your IDP and evaluate it on a scale of 1 to 5 for SMART goal sections. Is it specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound? And so kind of give each section kind of a score and be ready to talk a bit about how you felt you're doing on that SMART goal and share some feedback. And again, we'll spend about 5 minutes in the entire group just sharing back everyone's experience with this activity. So with that, I will set a 5-minute timer. I'm going to put myself on mute and go off camera while we do this. Take 2 minutes, either work on writing a goal or evaluating your goal based on where you're at. And then if you have questions, feel free to drop them in chat. And All right, and we're back. So hopefully you had a chance to work through those goals just a little bit. Here's what we'll take about 5 minutes to chat as a group. And so if folks want to go off mute and share, we'd love to have that. If you want to share in the chat, that's great as well. Hopefully we'll get some back and forth and folks can kind of engage with one another. But if folks want to share maybe their goal they set in brief and kind of how that process went for them in writing out this goal, and then we can hopefully get some feedback as well. So feel free to jump right in, folks.
I can share. This is Lori Kohlberg.
Thank you. Go ahead.
One of the goals that I had set, first, I do have a quick question.
Sure.
I'm a civil service employee, and so I work for the government, DOD. So IDPs are a regular part of our requirement at work as well. So I am knowledgeable about writing them in that sense. I've never had to write one though for school. So that's why I'm taking this class today.
Sure.
But I do get the general idea of the goals. So in that regard, one of the goals I set for myself was to go to or participate in a study abroad program during my graduate school. And I feel like it meets all of the evaluation elements. It's specific, it's measurable, it's achievable or not, and it's relevant because it would be for writing. And it is time bound because it does have a deadline on the application.
Yeah.
And so that's what I put for my goal. And I will say that I've already achieved it, so it is achievable. I was accepted into the trip for this summer to Madrid. So
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I'm super excited. I guess that's what I was gonna offer to the group, is just set, something like a study abroad trip. I think not only can expand your writing technique and experience, but also your cultural one. And this place like Spain, for example, where probably everybody is already bilingual, or at least mostly, so that is a good setting to practice that in, and then just learning how to write from another traditional sense, another cultural sense, I think can make everybody a better writer.
Absolutely. And I will definitely let Judy Moore over in OIP and Study Abroad let her know about the glowing recommendation you given for that, because you're 100% right on that. And thank you for sharing, by the way. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I think you set a specific goal. It has a measured quantity there. The only piece that I was going to give any feedback on would be the time-bound section, because in the initial kind of description, you said, at some point in your career, but if you've already kind of set the deadline of, this summer, you're definitely time-bound, right? And so on a goal like that, yeah, that's the only piece I would say is sometimes you have these goals that, might be a bit difficult, to achieve, or you might set them as very aspirational. If you don't put a time on it, even if you have to push it back, they're hard to achieve. And so I'm glad that you kind of set a specific semester on it, because that's the only feedback I would give on something like that. Because
thank you.
Yeah, for a study abroad or some kind of trip-based something, or attend a conference, it can be easy to kind of say, oh, I want to do that at some point.
Right.
And
that was my initial thought, was sometime in the 2-year grad school experience, I wanted to do it. But then when I found out there was this one this summer, and I've already traveled to Spain multiple times, so it seemed perfect. Then the time bound was just getting the application in on time.
Yeah. Excellent. No, that's a great example, and thank you. And I think it's also a great example of something that is academically related, but it goes outside the bounds of complete a chapter, right? It's a bit different. It looks at you as a holistic student, and I appreciate the way you're thinking on it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to share? Please feel free. Got a couple more minutes. Maybe get 1 or 2 more in. I know sharing in the digital space is everyone's favorite. This is my sarcasm. Going once, going twice. Bueller. Okay. Well, I won't force it though. If folks aren't interested in sharing, that's okay. It's a challenge by choice. But I do appreciate Lori for sharing with us today and give us a bit of thoughts on that. We'll go ahead and move to the next kind of section or half of the presentation, which is the feedback section. And so I think this is some piece that is not often considered. When we think of writing IDPs or goal setting or these documents, and it's really about how you're collecting feedback and how you're preparing for that. But it's hugely important, and it's a skill that I think we value and under teach to. And so I want to spend some time talking a bit about that. But the reality is it all starts with the relationship that you're able to set and build with your mentor, whoever that may be. And I'm going to encourage folks, I have all their sections where I talk about professional development, and I encourage folks to have both their academic mentor assigned by the institution, but also seek out additional mentorship. And throughout life, you should seek additional mentorship and find ways to have that help develop you. But navigating that relationship and what you get out of it is very important. And so the first step when you're doing your IDP review, you're building the relationship, is to set a strong foundation for getting the feedback that you need to be successful. That starts with setting SMART goals. Again, there's a reason we work on it. The reason goal setting is a main component of the IDP. The research says that when you set goals and they are written in a SMART fashion, more achievable, more relevant to you, that's what gives you the tangible benefit. It's also going to be a lot easier for your mentor to give you solid feedback if the goals have that specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound delineation, because they'll be able to actually go through and see the process that you've went through and give you specific feedback. When you're building that relationship, you also want to know that is an active partnership, and you need to show interest in it. If you want your mentor to take an interest in you, you have to show interest back, and it has to be kind of feel like a reciprocal peer-to-peer relationship in some capacity. And so you want to see it in that regard and be active in that. You need to maintain and initiate points of connection. Don't just wait for your mentor to reach out and say, hey, it's time for your annual review, set up an appointment with me, or come in and let's do your meeting, or let's chat about your dissertation. You need to initiate those points of contact and maintain those, knowing that your mentor may have several folks that they're also working with. And so you want to make sure that you're kind of maintaining and initiating those points of contact. You're driving the car in that way. Show appreciation for the time that they invest in you, so that, again, they know that you're valuing what's happening and that you're growing from it. If it feels very one-sided and they're putting a lot of effort into it and they don't feel like there's much appreciation or value there, they're not going to put any effort into it. And so let them know, and be grateful for the time you give thanks, just like you'd want someone to do for you if you're investing time in them. Make sure you're prepared for the meetings that you attend. Again, nothing is going to shut down that relationship and that feedback faster than kind of coming unprepared to a meeting. It shows a lack of respect for the mentor in that space and the time they've given, knowing that they have their own research and classes and that they're facilitating and grading they might need to do, and a life outside of the academic world, and all these different things kind of swirling around, and they've made this time for you and that you haven't prepared for it. So make sure you're prepared. You've done the reflective piece. You've thought about your goals and whether you've achieved them. You've thought about the next steps, so that you're prepared for the meeting and you know what to talk about. Post-review, apply what you learn. And so as you have a conversation, you get feedback that you find is actionable, apply that, and then bring that up in the next conversation so they know that they're having an impact. If it feels consistently like they're giving feedback that isn't being heeded, or it's kind of like talking to a brick wall, the feedback is going to dry up. And so apply that where applicable, where it can be. And then again, be active in seeking the constructive feedback, and we'll talk about how you can go about that successfully, because it's not always easy and it's not always comfortable, but you need to seek the constructive feedback. If all you seek is pats on the back and gold stars, you're not going to develop. You need to really find the constructive feedback so you can find ways to improve your writing, your goal setting, your academic skills, your professional skill sets. And so you have to find the constructive pieces to go along with it. Another piece to know, and this is really kind of almost geared towards the mentors, but we want you all to understand this as the mentees, is that an effective review really includes good, tangible feedback. Saying good job on every goal or student achieved the goal isn't really giving good feedback. It's not showing an effective review. And so what you are looking for as a mentee is to get your mentor to give good feedback that aligns with your long and short-term goals, that aligns with program requirements that you have for your degree, and that they're helping you understand the quality. And so they're giving you feedback that may be helping you elevate your goals to difficult yet achievable goals. And so you want to make sure they're giving you that feedback and you're seeking it. Mentors should also make sure they're giving positive feedback, and it comes from an asset-based approach. If everything comes from a negative mindset, it's going to be really difficult for you as the mentor or the mentee to keep coming back and asking to get assistance. It's going to feel very deflating, right? And so you want to make sure you're helping your mentor craft that positive space, and we want our mentors to be doing that. UTEP really champions an asset-based approach to our learning and education. And so we want to also facilitate that in the IDP process. And again, you want the mentor to visit throughout the year. As I've discussed, if you write a goal in November and then your annual review is in April and you don't talk about the goal until then, you're not going to get really actionable feedback. You're going to get stuff so far after the fact that you may not be able to make a change. And so you may complete a thorough review once every year. Again, April seems to be a common time that we see folks completing their IDP review. Maybe they write at the beginning of the year and they review it at the end. But throughout the year, you should pull out that piece of paper and talk about the goals as you achieve them. As the mentee, there's some steps that you can take to really seek and elicit constructive feedback. Again, knowing this is a soft skill, the ability to give constructive feedback, and not everyone is good at it. And not everyone is prepared to give it and may need a bit of assistance in seeking it or giving it out to folks. And so as the person who's requesting the feedback, you need to kind of be trained and have a mindset of how you can seek it and get it effectively. And again, that can be uncomfortable sometimes because you're asking someone to tell you where you haven't been as strong, right? How you can develop, which may be, uncomfortable. And so how do we go about that in a positive way that allows us to get what we need and feel good about it? The first thing is really seeking constructive feedback more frequently than you already are, right? And so if you're only getting it once a year and you're not seeking it all, you need to, again, regularly seek and ask for constructive feedback. The more you go through this process, the more comfortable it is for both you, the person requesting it, and the person giving it. If you have a relationship with your mentor where you meet monthly and you receive constructive feedback each month, it feels like a regular part of the process. Whereas maybe once a year and you request it and you get kind of a whole load of it just kind of dropped at your feet, that can feel, again, deflating. And so getting it consistently will assist with making it feel comfortable receiving it and being effective at taking action. You want to make sure you critically evaluate what kind of feedback you need to be successful and to achieve your goals, and then ask for that specifically. Just kind of setting your IDP down and saying, can you get some feedback? You may get feedback that you don't necessarily need in that moment, that isn't meeting your goal set. And so really think about, are you looking for performance goal feedback? Do you need general coaching? Do you need some positive comments? And it's okay to say, hey, it's been rough and I just need a little bit of, help me see the positive in my dissertation right now because I feel like I was on a negative. Help me understand where I'm going right so that I can build on that, right? And so that's constructive as well. Maybe you need the general coaching. You just need, how do I get from point A to point B? Or, I have not been hitting my milestones of writing my dissertation. Can you help give me some feedback on how I can do that? I keep setting deadlines at end of month and I am always 2 or 3 weeks late. And I'm not sure why I'm kind of hitting those late milestones. And so really think about what you need and then ask directly for that. You're your own expert on your goals and what you need. Again, make sure it's seeking it timely. I've mentioned this several times, but it's very important. Get the feedback as you are going through the goals so that it is actionable, you can make change. And again, the more timely it is, the more it'll feel good to receive the feedback and the more you can make change on it. You want to make sure that you're specifically asking open-ended questions. You want to avoid ever just kind of sitting down and saying, do you have any feedback? That is going to be very abstract. It's much too broad, and you're not necessarily going to get the targeted feedback you need. And it's going to be very easy for the person giving the feedback to just say no, or give one small piece of feedback because it feels like it's too big of a question. And so you want to ask open-ended questions of, how did I perform on this goal here? What can I do to achieve this goal that I've missed once or twice? So open-ended questions that get specific to what you're looking for. If you do receive vague feedback, probe a little bit and try to get examples, right? And so if you are asking for feedback on your writing and you get the comment, writing can be improved in chapter 3, that's very vague. What does that mean? What about the writing? And so kind of probe a little bit. And can you share an example for me where you feel the writing can be improved so that I can zero in on that and then go to the writing center and get that help? And they may say, well, the area where you can improve is that your grammar and mechanics are a little bit rough in this section, and we need to work on that. Your ideas are great, your citations are great, we're having some mechanics issues, so how do we get by that, right? Or they may say you're missing, you don't have enough citation in this area, and that's the piece I'm looking for. Or your research question feels a little unclear, right? So probe for examples if it's vague. Again, that shows to your mentor your willingness to collaborate on the process, and you take it seriously, and so that helps. Make sure you're collecting feedback on your goals and your performance of those goals, right? And so as you sit down and you have your goals from the prior review and talking a bit about that, also talk about what you're working on in the future and get feedback on that. If you, in your last session, you said you're going to complete chapter 3 and 4, and in your next section you want to do 5, 6, and 7, get feedback on, is this a reasonable time frame? Am I hitting this at the time I should be? So get the feedback over everything you're working on for past and future. And the last recommendation I have for seeking constructive feedback is not to rely solely on email. And again, this can be the old standby. It's what we are maybe most comfortable at, is typing up an email. We have the time to sit back, be measured in our thoughts, phrase it just how we want, and then send it off with our IDP attached and wait for a response. And especially for our introverted folks, that's me included, this is a more comfortable space to occupy. But you won't get as good of feedback without the connection piece of the dialogue that happens in an in-person or a virtual meeting. And so email's great. You can definitely do some things by email, and maybe you pass back your IDP or your goals a couple of times via email, but make sure you're also having the connective points of a phone call, a digital meeting, or an in-person meeting to grab coffee or meet in office hours and to talk about it. So there is that dialogue back and forth. And so make sure you're including that in what you do. You also need to prepare for the feedback. Again, you may be really good at asking for and probing and getting, seeking out that constructive feedback, but if you're not ready to hear it, you're not going to be able to utilize it well. And again, constructive feedback can sometimes be a little bit uncomfortable, especially when you have a lot of time and investment into these ideas and pieces of work that you're developing. And it can be hard, if somebody comes and says, chapter 3 is not very good. And, it really feels like chapter 3 has been your baby for the last month. You can take that personally. And so you need to prepare for the constructive feedback. And then that allows you to, again, have it be a positive experience and be a developmental one as opposed to a negative or deflating experience. And so you have to prepare for that bit. I have some recommendations for that as well. And so the first recommendation I have is that, when you come into those feedback sessions and you went through the steps to seek that constructive feedback and you start receiving it in dialogue, listen with intent to hear and not with the intent to respond, right? And this is important in a lot of phases of communication and in conflict mediation and things like that, but it really applies here in the feedback loop. As you're sitting down and they start kind of rattling off, how you can improve that section of your writing, your initial response and our initial kind of human response is to start thinking about, how am I going to respond to defend or explain? And that sometimes it comes from a defensive posture of, wanting to defend what you're working on. And sometimes it can come from a space of, I don't want to seem like I was incompetent, so I need to explain why this wasn't up to par, right? But when you do that, you're really taking yourself out of the feedback space and into an explanation space. And that's not where you need to be. So really hear what they're saying. Don't consider how am I going to justify whatever happened in my performance. Take the time to process before responding. Again, our initial knee-jerk reaction is as soon as we receive feedback is to be able to respond and either, again, justify why something happened the way it did, or elaborate on how you'll use the feedback, or acknowledge it. But you may need to take time to process that and really reflect on it and say like, okay, well, how am I going to use this? What does this mean for me? And do I agree with it? Because it's also okay to disagree with constructive feedback. So you have to consider that. Ask for more information if you need it. And again, that comes to that probing section. If they give you feedback, and even if they're attempting to be constructive, if you don't quite understand it or if it needs more direction, don't just kind of set it aside and say, well, I didn't really understand what they were telling me. Ask for more information. Again, show that engagement piece. Most folks are going to appreciate that engagement as you try to seek understanding versus, kind of just listening, saying thank you, and then leaving the office. And so engage in dialogue, engage in conversation. If you get some really difficult feedback that you need to process, it kind of goes along with that take time to process space, but even, goes beyond that. If you need a day or two, like, just let them know, like, I need to sit with that for a minute, for a day. Can I reevaluate on that, kind of reflect, and can I either set up a follow-up meeting or send you an email or some kind of point of contact to discuss this further? I need to think about that. Again, that shows that you're taking things very seriously and you want to have the best possible outcome. So give yourself that time, particularly when you have the more difficult pieces of feedback you might receive. Take the time to create an action plan for an improvement. And again, that's something I would include the mentor on. So as you're working through and they say, use the writing example, your grammar mechanics need some improvement, particularly in these sections. Create an action plan. Okay, so how do we go about that? Just saying improve doesn't help me get there. And so that may be, again, the example from earlier in the presentation, setting up regular meetings with the Writing Center to go in and meet with a peer writing coach and go through the materials and get that constructive feedback. And we do actually have peer writing coaches come to the graduate writing retreats, and folks have found them very helpful. And then folks then come and go in to the Writing Center to get that support. So that's something you could do. But create the action plan. What is that? So that you actually have clear steps. Otherwise, you, again, may not achieve that goal without clear steps. It's also okay to seek peer support. And so again, if you go in and you receive a lot of constructive feedback, it feels like, there wasn't as much positive and you're having a rough time with that, it's okay, again, take for some time, step back from that, and go just kind of commiserate with a peer and let them know, like, yeah, this is a hard meeting for me. And I need some support. I need to talk to somebody about that who has a similar experience. And so seek out your fellow grad students, the folks that you trust, and talk about how you're doing. So you get that peer-to-peer support. And lastly, make sure you're following up long-term. So if you get feedback on a goal, you set an action plan for that. You should then follow back up in the next meeting to let them know, how did it go? Did you follow the action plan? Do you have more questions about the feedback that you received and the goals that you're trying to set? Let them know that you're making progress. And again, that they didn't receive this feedback that just kind of went into the void and was never used. It's showing that, again, you value their time and their perspective. And then they will, again, in turn, be more willing to provide more feedback, more assistance, more help to help you be the best possible student and future professional. So again, that follow-up long-term is key. All right, so before we move to the final and concluding activity, I've thrown a lot out there. Are there any questions about giving and receiving feedback, how to seek it, how to prepare, or goal setting? Really, any questions at all? We'll take a moment here before I advance, and then we have kind of one last activity we can consider. Hopefully we get a bit of engagement with. And again, folks can feel free to put those messages in the chat or feel free to go off mute and let us know. All right, not seeing any questions in the chat, and or anyone coming off mute to let us know, and that's okay. If you have questions, feel free to keep dropping them in the chat. By the end of the session, we'll try to answer those. But we can move to kind of the final concluding activity that we'll work on. And we are, check our time here and see how we're doing, so we respect everyone's time. And so we have only about 5 minutes left on this one here. And so we want to have a chance to do the group share back overall. So we'll really look at this more of as a thought exercise versus a mainline activity for today. And then as we close out, I'll stay behind for any questions folks want to ask, kind of like in a small group session. But the last one I like to do is really look at a mentor expectation activity. And so in that, what you're really looking for, and kind of encourage you to write down these questions and really write out and think about your answers to these as you're finishing up the session. So jot these down. But you want to really consider, how frequently do you want to meet with your mentor? Knowing that, again, it's not entirely up to you, but it's not entirely up to the mentor either. And so setting an expectation early of like, yeah, I'd like to meet once a month. I'd like to meet every other week. I'd like to meet every 2 months, right? And then have that collaborative conversation with your mentor and what they're able to do. But don't just kind of wait for them to dictate the terms there. Really think about what type of feedback you're seeking and prepare for that and write it out. What do I need help on? What type of coaching are you hoping to receive? Are you looking for job search coaching, network coaching, life balance, etc.? What are you looking for in the feedback and coaching you want to receive? And then be open about that dialogue with your mentor. Your mentor should also be open about whether or not they can provide that. You may be asking for, job search assistance, and they may respond that that's really not their area of expertise because they're not in the career field you want to go into. They're an academic, and you want to go into the professional world. And so they may recommend you seek out an additional mentor, and that is 100% okay. But until you ask that question, you don't know. And then really kind of thinking about, I have this kind of like continuum, kind of informal continuum of how professional versus informal do you want the relationship to be with the mentor, right? And then you also have to give space for the mentor to also weigh in of what they want that to look like. Again, by human nature, some folks may want to keep it very professional, right? You may only refer to them as Dr. So-and-so, right? Other folks you may be on a first name basis with. You may be really wanting to have a relationship with your mentor where all of your meetings take place at the Starbucks coffee shop in CCSB. But your mentor may only want to meet in their office. Have a conversation about what you're looking for and what they're able to provide, and try to meet somewhere in the middle on that, or hopefully come to the same terms. If you don't have that dialogue, you may find out that your mentor would have preferred to meet for coffee at Starbucks, and you would have preferred to meet for coffee at Starbucks, but neither one of you said it, and all the meetings happened in a very formal professional setting of their office, and neither of you got what you're really looking for. And so kind of think about, what am I looking for in this relationship? So as we close out, I know we're getting low on time. Sometimes that happens, I get a bit verbose. Work through these answers for yourselves, share them with your mentor, share them with the folks that are helping you, and also sit down and maybe talk with a peer about these sections and see what feedback they can give you as well, because it's good to get the peer-to-peer feedback. And as we close up, we do have a question here about the template. Yes, there is a template that we have, and I'll actually really quickly here before the end, I will drop a link to where you can find this on the graduate school webpage. It's in a couple different places. It's on the forms tab, and it's also on the internal funding tab. I like to direct folks to the internal funding tab, and so I'll stop share here in a second and drop that in there. The reason why, one, I like for folks to know about our internal funding for our travel grant and our Dodson. The other is that it's a bit easier to find there. I put it right front and center in a clickable link. And so let me go ahead and stop share. I'll pull that up. I'll drop it into the chat here so y'all can find it. And then again, if you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat or come off of mute. I'll hang around until everyone exits today. So if you have questions, feel free to stop by and ask. But other than that, I appreciate your time today. We will post this recording here within the next couple of weeks. And so if you want to review any of these materials or direct other folks to it, please feel free to check that out or let other folks know about it. And There's some questions here about networking and job search. We will have some activities coming up like that in the future, and so be on the lookout for other professional development exercises and activities throughout the semester. We'll have some things on networking and job searching, a session on the job search and using the STAR method for interviewing. We have a conferencing section that'll talk about networking. So there's more sessions you might find applicable that'll be interesting for you.